Picture this. A howling wind tears across a frozen landscape. Snow buries everything in sight. The temperature drops so low that spit freezes before it hits the ground. And somewhere in this deadly white wilderness, a small band of humans huddles around a flickering fire. No grocery stores, no heated homes, no emergency services. Just raw human courage against nature's cruelest season. Tonight, we're stepping back 40,000 years to witness something extraordinary. Not just survival, but the birth of everything that makes us human. Because in those brutal Ice Age winters, our ancestors didn't just fight the cold, they conquered it. They turned frozen caves into warm homes. They transformed scraps of hide into life-saving clothing. They created fire from nothing but stone and determination. But here's what will surprise you most. They didn't just endure those endless winter nights. They thrived. They painted masterpieces on cave walls. They carved intricate tools from mammoth bones. They told stories that echoed through firelit shelters, passing down wisdom that kept their children alive. Every time you pull on a warm coat, every time you gather around a campfire, every time you share a meal with people you love, you're living proof of their incredible legacy. Because the humans who survived those ancient winters didn't just pass on their genes. They passed on something far more precious. They passed on the secrets of turning the world's deadliest season into humanity's greatest teacher. So settle in somewhere comfortable. Let the outside world fade away. Because we're about to discover how a handful of Ice Age survivors learned to transform winter from their greatest enemy into their most powerful ally. Imagine waking up to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning, but the terrifying hush of a world locked in ice. Outside your shelter, the wind doesn't whistle. It screams. Snow doesn't fall gently. It attacks in sheets of white fury that can blind you in seconds. This was winter 40,000 years ago. Not the mild, cold snaps we complain about today, but a season that could kill you before lunch if you made one wrong move. The Ice Age didn't just bring cold weather. It brought a complete transformation of the world. Imagine stepping outside and seeing nothing but endless white in every direction. No roads to follow, no buildings for shelter, no rescue teams coming if you got lost. Just you, your family, and a landscape that seemed designed to erase every trace of human life. But here's the thing that blows my mind. Instead of giving up, our ancestors looked at this frozen wasteland and said, "We're going to make this work." Think about that for a second. These people had never seen a match, let alone central heating. They didn't have weather forecasts or GPS. They couldn't order winter gear online or call for help if things went wrong. All they had were their bare hands, basic stone tools, and an incredible will to survive. And yet, they didn't just survive. They built communities. They raised children. They created art. They told stories that lasted for generations. In the middle of Earth's most brutal season, they found ways to be fully, completely human. The psychological impact of endless winter is something we can barely imagine today. Picture this. The sun barely rises above the horizon, even at midday. By 3 in the afternoon, darkness starts creeping in. And then comes the longest part of every day, 16 hours of pitch-black night. No electric lights to push back the darkness. No warm houses to retreat into. Just the small circle of firelight. And beyond that, an ocean of cold, black silence that stretched for miles in every direction. But instead of breaking under this pressure, something amazing happened. Our ancestors discovered that winter wasn't just about surviving. It was about coming together. When the outside world became impossible to navigate, People turned inward. They huddled closer around fires. They shared stories to fill the long hours. They took care of each other in ways that would have been impossible during the busy hunting seasons. Winter taught them that individual strength wasn't enough. You needed your community. You needed to trust the person next to you to keep watch while you slept. You needed to know that someone would share their food when yours ran out. You needed to believe that together, you could outlast whatever nature threw at you. And this is where the real magic happened. Because in learning to survive winter as a group, our ancestors discovered the secret ingredients of civilization itself: cooperation, planning, sharing resources, taking care of the vulnerable, passing knowledge from old to young. Every human culture that exists today, from New York City to remote villages in the Amazon, carries these same basic principles. We learned them around Ice Age campfires during the darkest nights in human history. But survival was just the beginning, because once you've figured out how to stay alive through an Ice Age winter, something incredible happens to your mind. You start to think differently. You begin to see problems not as impossible barriers, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. Need shelter? Study where animals hide from the wind. Need clothing? Figure out how to turn animal hides into flexible, warm layers. Need light in the endless darkness? Discover which materials burn cleanest and longest. Each solution led to the next challenge. Each innovation opened up new possibilities. And slowly, step by step, winter by winter, our ancestors transformed from simple hunters into something completely new. They became inventors, engineers, artists, storytellers. The cold that should have killed them instead forged them into the first truly modern humans. But how exactly did they do it? How did people with Stone Age technology turn the world's deadliest season into their greatest teacher? The answer lies in a series of brilliant discoveries that would change human history forever. And it all started with the most important element of survival, the one thing that meant the difference between life and death every single night: fire. It seems so simple to us now. Flip a switch, turn a dial, strike a match. But 40,000 years ago, fire was the closest thing to magic that existed on Earth. Picture yourself in an Ice Age winter without fire. The sun sets at 3 in the afternoon. The temperature drops to -20. Your breath turns to ice crystals the moment it leaves your mouth. And somewhere in the darkness around you, hungry predators are searching for their next meal. Without fire, you're dead before morning. With it, you're not just alive, you're powerful. Our ancestors didn't just learn to make fire, they became masters of it. And their techniques were so advanced that modern survival experts still use the same methods today. But first, they had to solve the most basic problem. How do you create fire from nothing? The earliest method was probably the simplest. Our ancestors would carry fire with them wherever they went. Not flames, but glowing embers wrapped in moss and bark. These traveling fires could stay alive for days if tended properly. Imagine being the person responsible for keeping your family's fire alive during a long winter journey. The weight of that responsibility would be overwhelming. But what happened when the fire went out? When rain soaked the embers or wind scattered the coals? That's when real innovation happened. Archaeological sites across Europe show us that Ice Age humans developed multiple ways to create fire from scratch. The most common method used flint and pyrite, two stones that create sparks when struck together. But creating sparks is only the first step. You need the right materials to catch those sparks and turn them into flames. Our ancestors discovered that certain dried grasses, mushrooms, and tree bark worked like natural tinder. They would collect these materials during warmer seasons and store them in waterproof containers made from animal bladders. When winter came and fire was desperately needed, they had everything ready. But here's what makes this even more impressive. They didn't just make fire, they engineered it. Inside caves and shelters, archaeologists have found sophisticated fire systems. Central hearths surrounded by carefully arranged stones to reflect heat. Smoke holes positioned to create natural ventilation. Fire pits lined with clay that could hold heat for hours after the flames died down. Some sites show evidence of multiple hearths connected by shallow trenches. These systems could channel heat throughout an entire shelter, creating the world's first central heating systems. Think about the planning that went into this. These people had to understand airflow, heat distribution, and fuel efficiency. They had to know which woods burned hottest, which created the least smoke, and which could smolder all night without constant attention. And they figured all this out through trial and error, with their lives hanging in the balance every single night. But fire wasn't just about warmth and light. It was the heart of everything that made them human. Around the fire, families came together at the end of each day. Children listened to stories that taught them how to survive. Hunters planned their next expedition. Elders shared knowledge that had kept people alive for generations. The fire was where tools were made and repaired, where food was cooked and shared, where the sick were brought to recover from illness or injury, where couples fell in love and made promises to each other. In a world without permanent buildings, the fire was home. It was the center of everything. Lose your fire, and you lost more than heat. You lost your humanity. But maintaining fire through an Ice Age winter required incredible skill and dedication. The fuel had to be constantly gathered and carefully rationed. Too much wood, and you'd run out before spring. Too little, and you'd freeze to death. Our ancestors learned to read the signs that told them how much fuel they'd need. They studied wind patterns, animal behavior, and subtle changes in temperature and humidity. They developed an almost supernatural ability to predict when storms were coming and how long they'd last. During severe weather, when going outside meant certain death, fires had to be managed with surgical precision. Every stick of wood mattered. Every coal had to be preserved. People would take turns through the night, feeding just enough fuel to keep the flames alive without wasting precious resources. Some of the most haunting archaeological discoveries are the fire failures, abandoned campsites where the hearth went cold and never restarted. These silent sites tell the story of families who ran out of fuel or couldn't restart their fire after it died. In the harsh arithmetic of Ice Age survival, fire meant life, and losing it often meant death. But the families who mastered fire did more than just survive. They thrived. Their children grew strong and healthy. Their tools became more sophisticated. Their communities grew larger and more stable. And in those glowing circles of warmth and light, something else was born. The first sparks of art, music, and storytelling. The creative fire that would eventually build civilizations. But even the most perfect fire couldn't keep you alive if you were naked. That's why our ancestors had to solve the next crucial puzzle: how to turn animal hides into clothing that could protect them from the most brutal weather on Earth. Take a look at what you're wearing right now. Chances are, you have multiple layers designed for different purposes. An inner layer that wicks moisture, a middle layer for insulation, an outer layer that blocks wind and water. You're looking at technology that was invented 40,000 years ago. Our Ice Age ancestors didn't just throw animal skins over their shoulders and hope for the best. They created clothing systems so advanced that modern Arctic explorers use the same basic principles today. But first, they had to learn how to turn a raw animal hide into something you could actually wear. Picture this. You've just hunted a mammoth. Congratulations, you've got enough meat to feed your family for months. But you've also got something equally valuable, a massive hide that, if prepared correctly, could save everyone's lives when winter comes. The process started immediately after the kill. Our ancestors knew that animal hides begin to decay within hours if not treated properly. They had to work fast, even in freezing conditions. First came the skinning, carefully removing the hide without making holes or tears. This required incredible skill, with stone knives that had to be kept razor sharp. One wrong cut could ruin hours of work and waste a resource that might mean the difference between life and death. Next came the scraping. Using specialized stone tools, they removed every scrap of fat and flesh from the hide. This wasn't just about cleanliness. Any organic material left on the hide would rot and destroy the leather. Then came the most labor-intensive part, the actual tanning process. Our ancestors discovered that certain materials, animal brains, tree bark, even urine, contained chemicals that could preserve hides and make them flexible. They would work these substances into the hide by hand, sometimes for days at a time. The result was leather that was waterproof, flexible, and incredibly durable. Hides prepared this way could last for years, even in harsh conditions. But here's where it gets really impressive. Our ancestors didn't just make leather, they tailored it. Around 40,000 years ago, someone invented the bone needle. This tiny tool, no bigger than your finger, revolutionized human survival. For the first time in history, people could create fitted clothing that moved with the body and provided maximum insulation. Archaeological sites show us exactly how sophisticated this tailoring became. Researchers have found winter clothing that included fitted pants that protected the legs without restricting movement, hooded jackets that covered the head and neck while allowing clear vision, waterproof boots with separate liners for extra warmth, mittens designed to protect fingers while still allowing tool use. But the real genius was in the layering system. Just like modern winter gear, Ice Age clothing worked in multiple layers, each with a specific purpose. The inner layer was soft, thin hide worn directly against the skin. This layer wickeded moisture away from the body and provided the first barrier against cold. The middle layer was thick, fluffy fur that trapped warm air close to the body. Different animals provided different types of insulation. Rabbit fur for lightweight warmth, bear fur for extreme conditions, reindeer fur for the perfect balance of warmth and flexibility. The outer layer was tough, weather-resistant hide that blocked wind and precipitation. This layer often came from larger animals like mammoth or bison, whose thick hides could withstand brutal conditions. The whole system was held together with sinew, dried animal tendons that made incredibly strong, flexible thread. Clothing sewn with sinew could stretch and move without tearing, crucial for people who needed to run, climb, and work in their winter gear. But perhaps the most impressive aspect was how they sealed the seams. Our ancestors discovered that certain resins and fats could waterproof the joints where pieces of clothing connected. This created garments that were not just warm, but completely weatherproof. Think about the trial and error that went into perfecting these techniques. How many people suffered from hypothermia while learning which furs worked best? How many died from exposure while figuring out the right way to seal seams? Each innovation was paid for with human lives, but each success made future generations safer. The clothing wasn't just functional, it was beautiful. Archaeological finds show decorative stitching, dyed furs, and ornamental beads worked into winter garments. Even in the struggle for survival, our ancestors found ways to express creativity and individual style. Children's clothing was particularly sophisticated. Small garments with extra insulation around vital organs, built-in hoods that couldn't be lost or forgotten, even tiny mittens connected to sleeves with sinew cord, the world's first mitten clips. Women who were pregnant or nursing had specialized clothing that provided access for breastfeeding while maintaining warmth. The elderly received extra layers around joints that became stiff and painful in cold weather. This wasn't mass production. Every garment was custom made for a specific person, taking into account their size, their role in the community, and their particular needs. A hunter's clothing emphasized mobility and durability. A crafter's clothing included extra pockets for tools. A storyteller's garments might be decorated with symbols that helped them remember important tales. But even the warmest clothing couldn't save you if you didn't have shelter. When the wind started howling and the snow began to pile up, you needed walls between you and the storm. And our ancestors created some of the most ingenious shelters in human history. Close your eyes and imagine the perfect winter shelter. You're probably thinking of a cozy cabin with thick walls, a sturdy roof, and a fireplace crackling in the corner. Now, imagine building that same level of protection using nothing but stones, sticks, animal bones, and your bare hands. That's exactly what our Ice Age ancestors did, and their solutions were so brilliant that architects today study their techniques. The most obvious choice for winter shelter was caves. Natural protection from wind and snow, existing walls and ceiling, and often some level of insulation from the surrounding earth. But our ancestors didn't just move into caves, they transformed them. Archaeological sites across Europe show us caves that were carefully modified for human habitation. Entrance areas were narrowed to reduce heat loss. Interior walls were built to create separate rooms for different activities. Sleeping areas were positioned in the warmest spots, while work areas were located near ventilation. The most sophisticated cave modifications involved smoke management. Early humans figured out that controlling airflow was the key to making firework indoors. They carved channels and built stone baffles that directed smoke up and out while keeping heat inside. Some caves show evidence of what can only be called ancient central heating. Networks of shallow trenches connected multiple fire pits, allowing heat to circulate throughout the entire shelter. Stone-lined channels carried warm air from the main hearth to sleeping areas and workspaces. But here's what's really impressive. They did all this without killing themselves with carbon monoxide poisoning. Modern experiments show that poorly ventilated fires in enclosed spaces can be deadly within hours. Our ancestors had to learn through trial and error how to balance heat retention with air circulation, and they got it right. But not everyone lived near suitable caves. In many areas, our ancestors had to build shelters from scratch, and that's where their engineering skills really shine. One of the most famous examples comes from Ukraine, where archaeologists discovered circular structures built entirely from mammoth bones. These weren't simple piles of bones. They were sophisticated architectural achievements. The largest of these bone houses was over 20 feet in diameter. The foundation was made from mammoth skulls and large leg bones arranged in a perfect circle. The walls were constructed from interlocking ribs and tusks, creating a dome-like structure that was both strong and flexible. Think about the planning that went into this. A single mammoth bone house required parts from dozens of different animals. These bones had to be collected, transported, and carefully arranged according to a complex design that existed only in someone's head. The engineering was remarkable. The circular shape distributed weight evenly and provided maximum interior space with minimum materials. The dome construction could withstand heavy snow loads and strong winds. Entry tunnels were built below ground level to prevent heat loss and create natural cold traps. Inside, these bone houses were surprisingly comfortable. Central hearths provided heat and light. Sleeping areas were raised above ground level for better insulation. Storage pits were dug into the floor for food and tools. But perhaps the most impressive aspect was the covering system. These bone frameworks were covered with multiple layers of hide, creating an insulation system that could keep the interior warm, even when outside temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Fahrenheit. In areas where large bones weren't available, our ancestors developed other construction techniques. Wooden frameworks covered with hides and packed with insulating materials. Partially underground shelters that used the Earth's natural insulation. Even snow houses that worked like igloos, trapping warm air while blocking wind. Each region developed its own architectural style based on available materials and local climate conditions. But all of these shelters shared common design principles that modern engineers recognize as fundamentally sound. Thermal mass to store and release heat gradually, insulation to reduce heat loss, vapor barriers to prevent moisture buildup, structural redundancy to handle extreme weather loads. Our ancestors understood all of these concepts intuitively, learned through generations of experience with winter survival. But the most important aspect of these shelters wasn't technical, it was social. These weren't just buildings. They were community centers where families came together, children learned essential skills, and cultural knowledge was passed from generation to generation. The layout of these shelters tells us about Ice Age society, communal spaces where everyone gathered, private areas for families, special places for elders who held important knowledge, storage areas that belonged to the entire group. Some shelters show evidence of seasonal reuse. The same sites were occupied winter after winter, with improvements and modifications made each year. This suggests that our ancestors weren't just wandering nomads. They had established territories and long-term relationships with specific locations. The most moving discoveries are the personal touches found in these ancient homes. Decorative stones arranged around hearths, carved ornaments hung from support posts, even primitive furniture, raised sleeping platforms, stone seats, carved storage containers. These details remind us that our ancestors weren't just trying to survive, they were trying to live. They wanted their shelters to feel like home, not just refuges from the storm. But no matter how perfect your shelter was, you still had to eat. And finding food in an Ice Age winter required some of the most sophisticated hunting strategies in human history. Imagine you're desperately hungry. Your family hasn't eaten meat in 3 days, and winter is far from over. Outside, snow covers the ground 3 feet deep. The temperature is well below freezing, and somewhere out there in that white wilderness, you need to find and kill an animal that doesn't want to die. This was the reality of Ice Age hunting. Not the romantic adventure we see in movies, but a desperate, dangerous struggle where failure meant starvation. But our ancestors didn't just stumble around hoping to get lucky. They developed hunting strategies so sophisticated that modern wildlife biologists study their techniques. Winter hunting started with intelligence gathering. Before leaving shelter, hunters needed to know where animals were likely to be, what condition they were in, and what the weather would do over the next several days. This required an incredible understanding of animal behavior. Our ancestors knew that deer would shelter in thick woods during storms, but moved to open meadows when the sun came out. They knew that mammoths followed ancient migration routes that didn't change from year to year. They knew which animals were weak from winter conditions and which were still strong enough to be dangerous. They read the landscape like a book. A broken branch here meant an animal had passed recently. Certain types of snow showed how long ago tracks were made. The direction of the wind told them which way scents would carry. But knowledge was just the beginning. Winter hunting required tools specifically designed for cold weather conditions. Spear points made from bone instead of stone, because bone didn't shatter in freezing temperatures. Shaft materials that stayed flexible even when ice cold. Binding techniques that held together when wet snow soaked everything. Some of the most impressive discoveries are Ice Age hunting weapons that were clearly designed for specific prey. Massive spear points for mammoth hunting. Smaller, sharper points for deer and elk. Specialized tools for fishing through ice. But the real secret of winter hunting success was cooperation. Individual hunters might get lucky occasionally, but feeding a family through an entire winter required organized group efforts. Our ancestors developed hunting strategies that involved dozens of people working together in carefully coordinated operations. One technique involved driving herds of animals toward natural barriers, cliffs, rivers, or narrow valleys where escape was impossible. This required hunters positioned at specific locations, all acting at precisely the right moments. One person acting too early or too late could ruin the entire hunt. Archaeological sites show us the remains of these organized hunts. Mass kill sites where dozens of animals died at once. Processing areas where meat was butchered and prepared for long-term storage. Even what appear to be hunting camps positioned at strategic locations along migration routes. The cooperation went beyond the hunt itself. Successful kills required immediate processing to prevent spoilage. While some hunters continued tracking other prey, others would begin the massive job of butchering and preserving meat. Every part of the animal was used. Meat was cut into strips and dried or smoked. Fat was rendered and stored in waterproof containers. Bones were turned into tools and building materials. Hides became clothing and shelter coverings. Even sinew was saved for thread and rope. This processing had to happen quickly, often in brutal weather conditions. Teams of people working with frozen hands to cut meat, scrape hides, and extract marrow before scavengers arrived, or the carcass froze solid. But winter hunting wasn't just about large game. Our ancestors were incredibly resourceful when it came to finding protein during the lean months. They developed techniques for catching fish through holes cut in frozen rivers. They trapped small mammals using snares and deadfalls. They even hunted birds, using nets and throwing sticks to bring down waterfowl. Some of the most ingenious techniques involved scavenging. Our ancestors learned to follow predators and scavenge from their kills. They knew how to drive wolves and bears away from fresh carcasses. They understood which scavenged meat was safe to eat and which was too dangerous. The psychological aspects of winter hunting were just as important as the physical techniques. Spending days in freezing conditions, often without success, required incredible mental toughness. Hunters had to stay alert and focused even when exhausted and hungry. They had to make split-second decisions in life or death situations. They had to maintain morale and group cohesion, even when facing repeated failures. The most successful hunting groups developed rituals and traditions that helped maintain psychological strength. Pre-hunt ceremonies that brought the group together. Success celebrations that reinforced bonds and shared identity. Even funeral rites for hunters who died in pursuit of food for their families. Women played crucial roles in winter hunting success. even if they weren't always directly involved in the kill. They processed tools and weapons. They prepared hunters for expeditions by making specialized clothing and equipment. They managed base camps and maintained fires that guided hunters home. Children learned hunting skills by participating in every aspect except the actual kill. They helped track animals, assisted with tool preparation, and learned by watching and imitating adult hunters. The knowledge required for successful winter hunting was vast and complex. Understanding of animal behavior, weather patterns, weapon technology, food preservation, group psychology, and dozens of other specialized skills. This knowledge was passed down through generations, but each hunter also had to learn through direct experience. The difference between theoretical knowledge and practical skill often meant the difference between life and death. But even the most successful hunt was worthless if the meat spoiled before it could be eaten. That's why our ancestors had to master one of the most crucial survival skills of all: how to preserve food through the longest, hungriest months of the year. Imagine your refrigerator just broke. Your freezer stopped working. All the grocery stores in your area closed permanently, and somehow you need to keep your family fed for the next 4 months using only the food you have right now. This was the food storage challenge our Ice Age ancestors faced every single winter, and their solutions were so effective that people in remote regions still use the same techniques today. The key to winter survival wasn't just getting food, it was making it last. A successful mammoth hunt might provide thousands of pounds of meat, but that bounty was worthless if it rotted before people could eat it. Our ancestors developed an entire science of food preservation, with techniques tailored to different types of food and different storage conditions. The most basic method was drying. Thin strips of meat hung over smoky fires or in cold, dry air would lose moisture and become jerky that could last for months. But this wasn't as simple as it sounds. The meat had to be cut to exactly the right thickness. Too thick, and the interior would rot before the outside dried. Too thin, and the meat would become brittle and lose nutritional value. The drying environment had to be carefully controlled. Too much humidity, and mold would grow. Too little, and the meat would dry too quickly and become inedible. The right amount of smoke prevented insects and added flavor, but too much smoke would make the meat bitter and unhealthy. Different types of meat required different drying techniques. Lean muscle meat dried quickly and easily. Fatty cuts needed special handling to prevent spoilage. Organ meats had to be processed immediately, or they would become dangerous to eat. But jerky was just the beginning. Our ancestors discovered that rendered animal fat was an incredibly valuable food resource that could be stored for months without spoilage. They learned to extract every drop of fat from hunting kills, rendering it in stone bowls heated by hot coals. The liquid fat was then poured into waterproof containers made from animal stomachs or carefully sewn hide pouches. This rendered fat served multiple purposes. It was a concentrated energy source that provided essential calories during the coldest months. It could be mixed with dried meat to create pemmican, a superfood that contained almost everything the human body needed to survive. Fat was also used as a preservative for other foods. Meat stored under a layer of rendered fat would stay fresh much longer than meat exposed to air. Even vegetables and other plant foods could be preserved this way. The containers used for food storage were masterpieces of Ice Age technology. Waterproof pouches that could be buried in snow. Stone-lined pits that provided natural refrigeration. Underground caches that stayed at constant temperatures year-round. Some of the most impressive storage systems were communal. Entire communities would work together to create large-scale food preservation operations. Smoking houses built from stone and wood, communal rendering areas where fat was processed in large quantities, shared storage pits that could hold enough food to feed dozens of people through the winter. But preservation was only part of the challenge. Our ancestors also had to ration their stored food to make it last through unpredictable winter conditions. This required careful calculation and incredible discipline. How much food did each person need per day to stay healthy? How long would winter last? What if unexpected storms prevented hunting for weeks at a time? The most successful groups developed sophisticated rationing systems based on age, activity level, and social role. Pregnant women and nursing mothers received extra portions. Children got foods high in the nutrients needed for growth. Elders were given easily digestible foods that provided maximum nutrition with minimum calories. But rationing wasn't just about individual survival. It was about group psychology. The way food was distributed could make or break a community's morale during the darkest months. Fair distribution built trust and cooperation. Hoarding by individuals or families could destroy group cohesion and lead to conflict that might kill everyone. The most successful communities developed elaborate social rules about food sharing that ensured everyone had enough to survive. These rules weren't written down, but they were passed from generation to generation as part of cultural knowledge. Children learned not just how to hunt and preserve food, but how to share it in ways that kept the community strong. Winter also brought unique nutritional challenges. Without fresh fruits and vegetables, people were at risk of developing scurvy and other diseases caused by vitamin deficiencies. Our ancestors discovered that certain preserved foods could provide essential nutrients. Pine needle tea prevented scurvy. Fermented plant materials provided B vitamins. Even certain types of mold that grew on stored foods turned out to have beneficial properties. They learned to identify and collect medicinal plants during the growing season, then dry and store them for winter use. Some of these plant medicines were mixed with food to prevent illness. Others were used to treat specific conditions that developed during the cold months. The psychological aspect of food during winter was just as important as the nutritional aspect. Shared meals brought people together and maintained social bonds. Special foods were saved for celebrations and ceremonies. Even simple seasonings made from herbs and spices helped make monotonous winter diets more appealing. Cooking techniques evolved to make the most of limited fuel and stored foods. Slow cooking methods that extracted maximum nutrition from bones and tough cuts of meat. One-pot meals that conserved fuel while providing complete nutrition. Even early forms of fermentation that created variety and improved digestibility. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Ice Age food systems was their sustainability. Our ancestors understood that overhunting in one area would lead to future food shortages. They developed hunting patterns that allowed animal populations to recover. They rotated between different food sources to avoid depleting any single resource. This long-term thinking required incredible discipline and planning. It would have been easy to overhunt during abundant years, but doing so would have meant starvation during lean years. The knowledge required to manage food resources through Ice Age winters was staggering. Understanding of animal behavior and migration patterns, expertise in food preservation and storage techniques, sophisticated rationing systems that balanced individual needs with group survival. But all of this knowledge would have been useless without the physical and psychological adaptations that allowed humans to thrive in conditions that would kill most other species. Your body is a walking museum of Ice Age survival adaptations. Every time you shiver, every time you get goosebumps, every time you unconsciously huddle closer to other people when you're cold. You're using survival mechanisms that kept your ancestors alive through the worst winters in Earth's history. But our Ice Age ancestors didn't just rely on reflexes. Over thousands of years, their bodies actually changed to become better suited for extreme cold. The most dramatic example comes from Neanderthals, our closest evolutionary relatives who specialized in cold weather survival. Their skeletons tell an incredible story of adaptation to Ice Age conditions. Neanderthals were built like walking heaters. Their bodies were compact and stocky, with shorter limbs that reduced surface area and conserved body heat. This body type follows Allen's rule, a principle of biology that says animals in cold climates evolve shorter extremities to minimize heat loss. But the adaptations went much deeper than just body shape. Neanderthal bones were incredibly thick and dense, providing both strength and insulation. Their rib cages were barrel-shaped, giving them larger lung capacity to warm, frigid air before it reached their lungs. Even their faces were adapted for cold survival. Neanderthals had large, prominent noses that served as natural air conditioners, warming and humidifying incoming air before it reached their lungs. Their sinuses were enlarged to provide even more warming space. These weren't random genetic changes. They were the result of natural selection, operating over thousands of generations. Individuals who were better adapted to cold weather were more likely to survive and have children. Over time, entire populations evolved to become cold weather specialists. But physical adaptations were just part of the story. Our ancestors also developed behavioral and physiological responses that helped them survive in conditions that would kill modern humans. One of the most important was their relationship with fat. Modern society treats body fat as something to be avoided, but for Ice Age humans, fat was literally life insurance. Our ancestors developed the ability to rapidly gain weight during abundant periods, building up fat reserves that could sustain them through months of scarcity. This wasn't just about eating more. Their entire metabolism could shift to promote fat storage when food was available and fat burning when it wasn't. Brown fat, a special type of body fat that generates heat instead of storing energy, was crucial for cold weather survival. Modern humans still have small amounts of brown fat, but our ancestors likely had much more, providing an internal heating system that could keep vital organs warm even when the rest of the body was cooling down. Sleep patterns also adapted to Ice Age conditions. Modern research suggests that our ancestors may have practiced biphasic sleep, sleeping in two separate periods during long winter nights, with a period of wakeful rest in between. This sleep pattern had several advantages. It allowed people to tend fires and check for dangers during the night. It provided time for storytelling, tool maintenance, and social bonding. It may have even enhanced memory consolidation and problem-solving abilities. The wake period wasn't anxious insomnia. It was a natural, restful state that modern people sometimes experience when sleeping without artificial light. Our ancestors. You have learned how to preserve food, how to ration it, how to share it. But knowledge alone is never enough. Winter does not just test the mind, it tests the body. And over countless generations, your body and the bodies of your ancestors became part of the solution. Think of how long you can last without food, without fire, without shelter. Each absence tears at you in different ways, but the one constant, the one resource you cannot ever put aside, is heat. You must hold on to it, nurture it, protect it as fiercely as you protect a child. For in the Ice Age, warmth was life itself. Your people's bodies became quiet miracles of adaptation. The shape of your torso, thicker, broader, more compact than those who lived in gentler climates, conserved precious heat. Shorter limbs meant less surface exposed to the cold. Layers of muscle and fat acted like insulation beneath the skin. Each feature, sculpted by centuries of survival, whispered the same truth. You were not helpless. Your very form was a shield. You have seen other humans too, strangers met during long migrations, whose bodies carried a different wisdom. The Neanderthals, with their stocky builds and powerful frames, seemed born of winter itself. Their broad noses warmed the air as they breathed. Their heavy bones supported immense strength. They taught you, without words, that nature shapes those who endure it. And though your kind would one day outlast theirs, their lessons remained written in your blood. But even the strongest body cannot withstand the cold alone. That is why you huddled close at night, pressed against your kin, body against body, breath mingling, heartbeats sinking. This was more than warmth. It was trust made flesh. Infants nestled in the crook of their mother's arms, elders wrapped between younger hunters, couples pressed together beneath layers of fur. Every night became a ritual of closeness, as necessary as eating or breathing. And in those shared bundles of warmth, something more than survival stirred. You began to understand belonging not just as safety, but as intimacy. You felt that your body's heat was never truly yours. It was part of a larger fire, a communal flame that moved through the group, keeping everyone alive. The cold, in its cruelty, bound you together more tightly than any summer ever could. By day, movement became its own kind of furnace. You learned that walking miles through snow, carrying wood, hauling meat, or simply keeping the blood flowing could mean the difference between life and death. To stop was to invite frost into your bones. And so you moved. The hunt was not just about food, it was about heat. Each chase, each lift, each breath of frozen air taken into burning lungs became an act of defiance. Still, the cold attacked in silence. Fingers stiffened, toes numbed, skin burned with frostbite. To guard against this, you layered your garments, wrapping fur within fur, hide over hide. The wisdom of your clothing was paired with the wisdom of your body. Heat generated within, captured by layers, amplified by touch. Every choice, how tightly to cinch a hide, how thickly to wrap a child, how close to sit beside the fire, was part of the great balancing act of warmth. But there were limits, always limits. You remember those who succumbed, bodies too thin to hold the fire within, elders whose strength waned with age, children born fragile into a brutal season. And each death reminded you that no matter how strong the body, it was always a vessel too easily emptied. In their memory, you became more disciplined, more careful, more reverent toward the hidden fire within. In the long nights, you sometimes dreamed of other worlds, places where warmth poured freely from the ground, where winds carried not ice but the perfume of blossoms. And perhaps, you thought, there might be a land where the body did not need to fight so fiercely, where the seasons were kind. But still, you woke with frost in your hair, the breath of your kin against your skin, and knew that here, in this white wilderness, your body was exactly as it needed to be. And as centuries passed, this battle between flesh and frost carved itself into memory. Even now, in your modern bed, with heaters humming and blankets heavy upon you, some echo remains. The instinct to curl close to another, the comfort of pressing cold hands into warm palms, the sigh of relief when warmth seeps back into chilled bones. These are not just habits of convenience. They are ancient rituals, passed down from bodies built for cold. when you rub your hands together on a winter street, when you share a blanket with someone you love, when you marvel at the strength of those who endure frigid landscapes even today. You are repeating gestures older than language. Your body remembers what your mind may forget. That survival was not only about tools and fire, but about the furnace you carried within and the warmth you gave to one another. The body was not merely flesh in the Ice Age. It was history. It was technology. It was memory. And it was always the first shelter. You have learned how the body itself became a furnace, a shield, a living tool for survival. Yet even the strongest body was fragile at the start of life. And so, in the endless white silence of the Ice Age, the greatest challenge of all was not keeping yourself alive, it was keeping your children alive. Winter was cruelest to the smallest. A grown hunter could endure hunger for days, shiver through bitter nights, and still rise to walk at dawn. But a child, with thin limbs and fragile skin, could be extinguished by a single night of cold or a single day without food. And so, everything your people built, every fire, every shelter, every preserved morsel of food, was built not only for survival, but for them, for the children of winter. The moment a child was born, the community shifted. Mothers wrapped infants in layers of fur, pressing them against bare skin, so body heat could pass directly into their tiny forms. Elders hovered, whispering soft words, guiding careful hands, teaching which herbs soothed fevers, which furs insulated best, how often to nurse. The group became a circle around the child, because the loss of one small life was never just the loss of one. It was the loss of the future. You can almost hear it now. The muffled cries of an infant in the stillness of a snow cave, quickly soothed by the steady rhythm of a mother's heartbeat. You can see the father tending the fire, ensuring the coals never fade, because he knows one lapse could mean his child's breath will not rise again. Each gesture becomes sacred, because each gesture holds the weight of generations. But protection was not only physical. Children needed to learn, quickly, how to live in a world that offered no mercy. And so, from the moment they could crawl, play became their first teacher. A toddler dragging a stick through snow was practicing the motions of a spear thrust. A little girl stacking bones outside a shelter was rehearsing the building of storage pits. Games were never just games. They were rehearsals for survival. You remember your own childhood in that world. You remember watching your elders with wide eyes, imitating every movement. You learned to chip stone by pretending with pebbles. You learned to carry loads by dragging small logs. Even laughter had its lessons, running, chasing, falling into snow, rising again with the resilience that winter demanded. The line between play and preparation blurred until there was no line at all. And as you grew, teaching shifted. No longer only imitation, but direct instruction. A grandfather's hands, rough and scarred, guided yours as you learned to cut meat at the right angle. A grandmother's voice, soft but firm, told you which plants to pick in, summer for winter teas. These lessons were not taught in classrooms. They were carved into you in firelight, on long hunts, in moments of stillness. Knowledge passed mouth to ear, hand to hand, heart to heart. The elders were the memory of the tribe. They carried centuries within them, stories of hunts long past, winters harsher than this one, mistakes that cost lives, triumphs that brought survival. When your body grew weary of learning, their stories kept teaching. And in the deep darkness of winter, when the wind howled outside and firelight flickered on cave walls, you sat curled at their feet, listening. They spoke not only of survival, but of meaning. Why the mammoth must be honored, why the fire must never be mocked, why sharing food kept the spirits strong. Without the elders, survival knowledge would scatter like snow on the wind. Without children, there would be no one to receive it. And so, winter bound the two together, the very young and the very old, as if the tribe's future and its past had to sit side by side. The child carried hope, the elder carried memory, and between them, the adults became the bridge. But it was never easy. Sometimes children were lost. Disease, accident, cold, hunger, all could steal them away before their first hunt, before their first spring. The grief was heavy, almost unbearable, but even in sorrow there were lessons. The tribe learned to redouble its care, to innovate new ways of wrapping, feeding, sheltering. Each loss carved wisdom deeper, and that wisdom was offered to the next generation. You imagine the long winter night, children bundled together beneath a blanket of hides, their breath rising in faint clouds, their laughter muffled as they whisper to each other. Around them, mothers rest lightly, always listening. Fathers guard the fire, tending it like a heartbeat. Elders murmur old tales, shaping dreams. The children sleep, but through them, the tribe sleeps lighter, ready to wake at the smallest sign of danger. And through all of this, you realize something. Survival was never just about strength. It was about care. It was about the fierce tenderness that made adults sacrifice their own warmth, their own portions, to protect the youngest. It was about patience, guiding clumsy hands through the motions of survival again and again until skill was born. It was about memory, elders gifting children with knowledge so that the tribe could outlive them. Even now, you carry this inheritance. When you teach a child how to hold a spoon, how to tie a shoe, how to speak their first word, you are repeating a chain that began around Ice Age fires. When you listen to a grandparent tell a story, one you have heard many times, you are honoring the same role elders once held, guardians of memory in the long night of forgetting. In the modern world, with heaters and lights, with supermarkets and schools, it may seem far removed from the Ice Age cave, yet the pattern remains. Children learn through play, elders pass down wisdom, families circle protectively around their most vulnerable, and somewhere deep in your bones, the urgency of winter survival still whispers, protect them, teach them, remember. The children of winter were the future carved out of frost. They were the fragile promise that tomorrow would exist. And because your ancestors guarded them so fiercely, you are here now, listening, remembering, breathing warmth in a world that has forgotten how cold it once was. So the cycle continues, from elder to child, from past to future, from firelit cave to modern home. Survival was never only about enduring the cold. It was about carrying life forward, one small breath at a time, through the endless winter, into the light of spring. The children sleep, their breaths rising in pale clouds, bundled tightly in the warmth of hides. The elders rest too, though their eyes open and close often, flickering like the fire. You sit among them, your body weary, your mind heavy. The food is rationed, the cold presses in. The long night of winter stretches on with no promise of its end. And yet, in this moment of stillness, something unexpected begins to stir. It is not hunger, not fear, not even the sharp vigilance of survival. It is a softer ache, the ache for meaning, for connection, for beauty in a world of endless snow. And from that ache, something ancient awakens within you. The urge to create, the urge to leave behind more than just a footprint in the snow. You rise and take a burning torch into the depths of the cave. The walls breathe with shadow. The stone seems alive, waiting. Your hand carries a piece of ochre, ground into powder and mixed with fat, forming paint that glows warm against the rock. You press your palm against the wall, leaving behind the red imprint of your hand. For the first time, you see yourself outside yourself, a mark of presence, proof that you were here, living, breathing, enduring. And so the darkness begins to fill with light, not from the fire, but from the art. Cave painting was more than decoration. It was survival of another kind. When you painted an animal, a mammoth charging, a bison leaping, a reindeer in flight, you were not simply making an image. You were rehearsing the hunt. You were honoring the spirit of the creature. You were giving courage to your people, showing them that even in the harshest winter, life continued to move, to run, to thrive. Each stroke of color was a conversation with the unseen world. The curve of a horn carried power. The rhythm of lines across a wall carried memory. The flicker of torchlight made the painted creatures dance, as if alive, as if reminding you that the world beyond the cave was more than cold and death. Children watched wide-eyed as you painted, learning that survival was not just about food or shelter. It was about spirit. Elders nodded in silence, remembering winters past when these same walls received marks from their own hands. In the cave, you were all connected, not only to one another, but to ancestors long gone and to descendants yet to come. But painting was not the only art that filled the darkness. There was music too, born of bone and breath. Someone carved holes into the hollow wing bone of a bird, lifting it to their lips. A sound emerged, thin at first, then steady. It pierced the silence like a thread of light. The first flute, carrying notes that spoke what words could not. Around the fire, voices joined, humming low, rising together, filling the cave with vibration. That music was not entertainment. It was medicine. It soothed the restless, comforted the fearful, gave rhythm to the endless hours when night seemed eternal. A child who cried from hunger could be calmed by song. A weary hunter could find strength again in the pounding of a drum made from stretched hide. Music turned despair into something bearable, shaping sorrow into sound, shaping silence into togetherness. And then there were stories. Oh, the stories. Around the embers, words rose like smoke, curling upward into the night. You listened as elders told of great hunts, of spirits who lived in rivers and trees, of ancestors who walked before you. Stories became maps of memory, guiding you where to travel, where to hunt, how to honor the dead. They carried warnings. Do not go there, for the ice will swallow you, and hopes. When the sun returns, the herds will follow. Stories taught children the values that could not be written on stone. They taught patience, bravery, generosity, reverence. They turned the cold night into a classroom, where imagination was as vital as the fire. Without stories, fear would hollow you out. With them, fear was given shape, and once shaped, it could be faced. So in the long dark, you painted, you sang, you told stories. You created not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Creativity was not an escape from survival. It was survival. It gave meaning to suffering. It gave form to memory. It gave strength to continue when the body wanted only to stop. And now, sitting in your modern room, surrounded by light and comfort, you feel the echo. When you hum to yourself in the shower, when you tell your child a bedtime story, when you doodle on paper during a long day, You are repeating rituals that began in caves of stone. When you look at art in a museum, when you listen to a song that makes you cry, when you lose yourself in the rhythm of a story, you are touching that same ancient thread. Art in the darkness was a torch that never went out. It carried humanity through winters that could have ended you. It kept the mind alive when the body faltered. It connected the living to the dead, the strong to the weak, the present to eternity. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the cave wall before you, flickering with shadows. Imagine the painted bison running, the flute echoing, the elder's voice rising and falling. Feel the warmth of the fire, the closeness of the tribe, the pulse of survival, not just in body, but in soul. That is your inheritance. That is why you are here. The darkness could not silence you. The cold could not break you. Because in the heart of winter, you discovered something deeper than warmth. You discovered the fire of creation, burning not in wood or fat, but in the human spirit itself. And that fire still burns in you. So next time you see a painting, or hear a song, or tell a story to someone you love, remember the caves, remember the darkness, remember the hands pressed against stone. You are not separate from them. You are their continuation. Their art is your art. Their survival is your breath. The children of winter survived because their parents painted, sang, and told stories. You survive now for the same reason. Because without art, there is no humanity. Without creation, there is only silence. And humanity, even in its darkest hour, chose creation. So the caves are not only behind you, they live within you. Every story, every song, every painting you make or witness is another torch lit against the eternal dark. And perhaps that is the greatest survival of all. The songs fade, the painted animals rest on the walls, and the fire burns low. For a moment, the cave is quiet, except for the sound of breathing. You have danced with shadows, carried stories through the dark, and filled silence with meaning. But not even art can hold back everything. There comes a time, as inevitable as the falling snow, when warmth slips away and breath leaves the body. For all your strength, for all your knowledge of fire and food, for all your careful protection of children, winter always asked for payment. And sometimes that payment was a life. Death came softly at times, like a flame dying when fuel was gone. At other times it came suddenly, an accident on the hunt, an infection in a wound, an illness spreading through the tribe. However it arrived, it was always a guest that could not be refused. You remember the first time you saw it as a child, an elder who once told you stories by the fire, who once guided your clumsy hands, lay wrapped in hides, their breath shallow, their eyes clouded. The fire still burned, the tribe still moved, but you felt a silence deeper than winter itself. It was not just one life ending. It was the vanishing of memory, of wisdom, of warmth that once flowed freely into the circle. And yet, your people did not meet death with despair alone. They met it with care. They tended the sick with herbs gathered in summer, roots and teas that eased pain, smokes that calmed fevers. They laid moss on wounds, stitched gashes with sinew, set broken bones with splints carved from wood. Survival was not only for the strong, it was for those who received help, who were carried when they could not walk, who were fed when they could not lift a hand. The act of caring for the sick was as important as hunting or fire building. A tribe that abandoned its weak soon learned that cruelty invited disaster. For one day, the strong too would stumble, and without compassion, no one would rise again. And so, in the flickering dark, you learned that to tend to the ill was not a burden, but a form of strength. Still, not all could be saved. And when life finally slipped away, the tribe gathered. They did not treat the body as mere flesh. They treated it as a vessel that had carried fire, laughter, struggle, and memory. They dressed it in furs, sometimes painted it with ochre, red as blood, red as life itself. They placed tools beside it, a scraper, a spear point, a necklace of teeth, as if the journey did not end here, but continued elsewhere. Then came the burial, in shallow graves dug into frozen ground, or stone chambers deep within caves. You laid the body with care. Some were covered with flowers gathered in warmer seasons, some with antlers or shells, tokens of honor. Children were buried with tiny ornaments, elders with symbols of wisdom. Even in death, the tribe spoke. You were one of us, you belonged, you will not be forgotten. The fire burned bright on those nights. Songs rose not of despair, but of remembrance. Elders told stories of the one who had passed, weaving their life into the fabric of memory. Children listened, learning that death was not erasure, but transformation. The body returned to earth, but the story remained, carried forward in voice, in art, in ritual. And the grief, though heavy, was shared. You cried together. You sat in silence together. You carried the weight together, because winter had already taught you that survival was never individual. Loss, too, like warmth, had to be shared. A tribe that grieved together was stronger than one that grieved apart. You imagine the long procession into the snow, carrying a body wrapped in fur. The wind howls, yet you walk slowly, carefully, as if each step matters. You lay the body down, cover it with stone, speak words that rise into the night. The cold does not feel quite as bitter, because in the act of honoring the dead, you remind yourself of why the living must endure. This way of facing death was more than ritual. It was survival of the spirit. Without it, despair could unravel the tribe faster than hunger. With it, even in grief, there was continuity. Even in loss, there was meaning. And you feel the echo of it today. When you visit a grave, when you whisper a prayer, when you light a candle for someone gone, you are repeating gestures older than memory. When you bring food to the sick, when you sit beside a hospital bed, when you hold the hand of someone fading, you are carrying the same wisdom the Ice Age gave your ancestors. Care is survival. For in the end, death did not divide humanity from life. It deepened life. It reminded you of its fragility, its beauty, its urgency. It taught you that every fire must be fed, every embrace must be held a little longer, every story must be told before silence claims the voice. So when death came, calling, your people did not surrender. They mourned, they honored, they remembered, and then they continued. Because to live on after loss was not betrayal. It was the highest form of respect. It meant carrying the fire forward for those who no longer could. And you, here and now, are proof of that chain. You live because countless hands tended the sick, honored the dead, carried grief with grace, and chose, again and again, to keep walking into the white wilderness. Close your eyes and imagine the circle once more. The fire glowing, the bodies huddled close, the empty space where one once sat. Feel the sorrow, yes, but also feel the strength that rises from it. The circle is smaller, but unbroken. The flame flickers, but does not die. Death has come, but life continues, carried on your breath, your blood, your memory. This is the human story. Not just surviving winter, but surviving loss. Not just enduring hunger, but enduring grief. not just living in the body, but living in the heart. And so the lesson of winter is complete. Protect the children, honor the elders, create art in the darkness, and when death comes calling, meet it with care, with ceremony, with remembrance. For in these acts, humanity found not only survival, but meaning. Even now, in your modern life, the echo lingers. You mourn, you honor, you remember. And in doing so, you keep alive a wisdom carved in ice, that death is not the end of the human story, but the thread that binds generations together. So carry it forward. For the ancestors who laid their dead in caves, for the children who once played beside fires, for the future that still depends on memory. Carry it, and you will never be alone, even when the night feels endless. You have known the cold, the hunger, the grief. You have painted on stone walls, sung through endless nights, held the sick in your arms, and buried the ones who could not stay. Winter has pressed you down, tested your body, your mind, your spirit. Yet even in its grip, you never stopped watching, never stopped listening, never stopped hoping, because you know something the cold cannot erase. Winter is not forever. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. The snow still lies heavy on the ground, the winds still cut sharp against your skin, but in the silence, you notice something different. A trickle of water running beneath ice, a patch of ground softened, dark and damp where the sun lingers longer. The call of a bird that vanished months ago now returned with its song. Subtle, fragile signals, but to your people, they are louder than thunder. You lean close to the earth, pressing your ear to the soil, and you swear you can hear it breathing again. The frozen stillness stirs. Roots awaken beneath your feet. The long sleep of the land is ending. The first signs of spring are more than physical changes. They are psychological lifelines. For months, your tribe has lived inside a world of endless night, where time itself seemed to vanish. Days, blurred, marked only by rationed meals and the tending of fires. Hope became a discipline, not an instinct. But now, when a bird sings, when a stream flows, you feel something inside you crack open, like ice breaking apart in sunlight. And with that opening, energy returns. The children, who once sat curled around fires, restless and weary, now leap at the chance to run outside, splashing in meltwater, laughing at the warmth on their faces. Elders sit at the cave's mouth, letting light fall across their hands, their eyes bright with memory. Hunters sharpen their tools with a new rhythm, not the slow grind of endurance, but the quickening pace of anticipation. The cycle is turning, and your people know it well. Spring means movement. Winter held you in one place, tied to stored food, to the circle of fire and shelter. But as the land awakens, so too must you. Herds begin their migrations. Plants push green shoots through soil. Rivers swell with meltwater. The world is shifting, and if you do not shift with it, you will be left behind. So the preparations begin. You test your tools, repair sleds, gather hides into bundles. The strongest walk to scout the land, reading signs invisible to untrained eyes. The direction of winds, the freshness of animal tracks, the budding of certain plants that mark the changing season. Every detail matters, for to move too soon risks exhaustion, and to move too late risks starvation. And as you prepare, you reflect. Winter has not only taken, it has taught. You have learned which foods sustain longest, which shelters hold strongest, which bonds within your tribe cannot be broken. You carry those lessons into spring like weapons sharper than any spear. Renewal is not a reset, not a forgetting of hardship. It is the transformation of hardship into wisdom. The return of warmth reshapes your mind. In the deepest nights of winter, thoughts turned inward, heavy with memory, heavy with loss. But spring draws your gaze outward. You notice the color of light, golden and soft against the snow. You notice the scent of thawing earth, rich and alive. You notice your own body, weary but rising, responding to the promise of abundance. There is joy here, yes, but also reverence, because you know how thin the line is between survival and loss. You have walked that line for months, balancing on hunger, sickness, cold. And so every drop of meltwater, every bud on a tree, every bird returning is not ordinary. It is miracle. And with miracle comes ceremony. Your people do not greet spring in silence. Around the first strong fire of the season, songs rise not of mourning, but of renewal. Elders lead chants, children dance in circles, hunters lift their spears to the sky. The fire becomes more than warmth. It becomes a symbol that the earth itself has chosen life again. But spring does not erase the memory of winter. The graves remain. The empty places in the circle remain. Renewal carries grief alongside joy, reminding you that each new season is not given freely. It is won with discipline, with sacrifice, with love. And perhaps that is why the return of spring feels so holy, because it is not just the land awakening. It is you awakening with it. And here, in your modern life, the cycle still shapes you. You may not track herds or gather roots, but you feel it all the same. The heaviness of winter, when days are short and nights seem endless. The sudden lightness when spring returns, when blossoms push through cracks in the pavement, when warmth returns to your skin. Your ancestors trained your body, your mind, to feel this shift, to celebrate it, to let it renew you. So when you walk outside and smell fresh rain, when you hear the first birds in the morning, when you open windows to let sunlight fill your room, you are repeating the oldest ceremony. You are welcoming life back into the world and into yourself. Spring is more than a season. It is proof that endurance has meaning. Proof that even after loss, there can be growth. Proof that the long night, no matter how endless it seemed, cannot last forever. And so, you rise with it. You gather your strength. You look toward the horizon not with fear, but with readiness, because spring is not only a gift, it is a summons, a call to move, to plant, to travel, to live fully again. The signs are subtle at first, but once you learn to read them, they are everywhere. The world whispers, then sings, then shouts, continue, and you, like your ancestors, listen. The circle of life turns once more, and with it, you. The snow melts, rivers swell, and spring opens its hands to you once more. You feel the warmth on your face, the earth soft beneath your feet, the promise of movement and life returning. But even as you step forward, even as you breathe the air of renewal, the memory of winter clings. It does not vanish with the cold. It remains etched into you, like carvings in stone, like stories painted on cave walls. Winter was not simply a season. It was a teacher. It shaped the rhythm of your days, the strength of your body, the depth of your culture. It carved its lessons into bone, into memory, into the very instincts that still guide you now, though the ice age lies far behind. The legacy of winter is not lost. It still lives within you, written in ice, carried forward in every breath. Think of fire. You no longer crouch over flint and tinder, shielding sparks from the wind, but you still gather around it, around stoves, around hearths, around the glow of candles. Fire became more than heat. It became the center of home, the heart of family. The instinct to draw close to its light in dark times remains. When a storm rages outside, when the power flickers, when you light even a single flame, you feel safer, calmer, more human. That is winter's legacy. Think of food. You do not hunt mammoth, you do not bury caches in snow, yet you still store, still preserve, still prepare for leaner days. Your refrigerator hums, your pantry holds reserves, your holidays mark seasons with feasts, and deep within the instinct remains. Share food to build trust, break bread to form bonds, ration carefully when times are uncertain. Every bite carries echoes of Ice Age discipline. Think of clothing. You pull on jackets, scarves, boots, not only for fashion, but because the body remembers. To layer is to survive. To cover the head and feet is to protect the furnace within. And in the thick fabrics, in the warm gloves, in the soft lining of shoes, you carry forward the ingenuity of ancestors who stitched hides with bone needles under flickering light. Think of shelter. You live in houses of brick and wood, warmed by machines, lit by wires, but the instinct is the same. The walls must hold, the roof must shield, the hearth must center. And even in the most modern city, even in skyscrapers and apartments, you still feel a pull toward enclosed spaces when the wind rises, the rain lashes, the snow falls. Shelter is not luxury. Shelter is memory. But winter's legacy is not only physical, it shaped your social world. It taught you to sit close, to care for the sick, to honor the dead, to raise children through play and story. It taught you that isolation was death and connection was life. Even now you feel it. The ache when loneliness grows too heavy, the warmth when a friend visits, the deep comfort of being held. These are not modern inventions. They are winter's lessons, carried across thousands of years. Psychologically, too, the cycles remain. You still feel the heaviness of winter, even when surrounded by comforts. The short days, the long nights, they press on the mind, and you fight them with light, with gatherings, with celebrations of warmth. And when spring comes, you feel lighter, more alive, more open, just as your ancestors once did when the first streams melted. Your moods rise and fall with the seasons because the body remembers, because survival was once tied to these rhythms and the memory cannot be erased. Culturally, the fingerprints of winter spread everywhere. Myths of death and rebirth, gods of light who return after darkness, festivals marking solstice and spring, all of them are echoes of Ice Age survival, stories of underworlds, of journeys through night, of heroes who descend and rise again. They are not abstract tales. They are the human response to endless cold, to the certainty of loss, to the hope of renewal. And spiritually, winter carved the deepest legacy. In the darkness, you learned to create light, not only with fire, but with art. You painted animals on walls not just to remember, but to honor. You sang songs not just to pass time, but to shape hope. You told stories not just to teach, but to connect your soul to something greater. Creativity became prayer, and prayer became survival. That instinct, too, remains. You seek beauty not because you must, but because without it, life feels less alive. This is the eternal human story, resilience, carved from ice, passed down through every generation. The cold tried to break you. Hunger tried to silence you. Death tried to scatter you. But instead, you endured, you adapted, you remembered, and you carried forward not only strength, but meaning. You live now in a world of comfort, lights that banish darkness, heaters that chase away frost, medicines that cure sickness, technologies that connect across continents. But beneath all of it, you are still the same. Still the child listening to stories around the fire. Still the hunter watching the horizon for signs of spring. Still the elder passing memory to the next generation. And this is why winter matters. Not because it was cruel, but because it taught you who you are. It reminded you that survival is not only about strength, but about care, about trust, about creation. It showed you that even in the longest night, humans will sing. Even in the deepest cold, humans will share. Even in the face of death, humans will remember. Close your eyes and imagine the cave one last time. The fire flickers. The walls glow with painted animals. The children sleep. The elders tell stories. The hunters sharpen their tools for the coming thaw. Outside, the snow still falls, but inside there is warmth. There is hope. There is life. That is your inheritance. That is your legacy. And when you wake tomorrow in your modern room, when you sip warm coffee, when you pull on a jacket, when you greet a loved one, you will carry it still. Winter lives in you. The ice shaped your instincts, your culture, your soul. And though the glaciers have melted, the story remains. The legacy written in ice is not only about survival, it is about the choice to live with meaning, to endure not just for yourself, but for others, to transform struggle into song, pain into story, cold into closeness. That is why humanity endures. That is why you endure. So let the snow fall in your memory. Let the fire burn in your heart. Let the story continue in your voice. Because the Ice Age is not gone. It lives in you. And the resilience that carried your ancestors through endless winters is the same resilience that will carry you through every season of your life. The eternal human story is hope, and it is yours to tell.